We will now move into our Pathways to Recovery and Resiliency Funding webinar series, which is all about energy and energy code funding. We have a whole lineup of great speakers, most of which are from the Colorado Energy Office. We have Christine Berg, Adam Berry, and Shannon Bauman, Annie Veal, and Ari Moladina from the Colorado Energy Office. And then we will conclude today's webinar with Julia Masters, who will provide an update on the Microgrids for Community Resilience program. So with that, if we want to go ahead and pull up the slides, I will turn it over to Christine to go ahead and kick us off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shale. So happy to be with all of you today. I'm Christine Berg with the Colorado Energy Office, and we've got some exciting stuff to talk to you about. There's so many programs, so much grant funding, both at the state and federal level, and this sort of just touches some of the highlights. So feel free, if you our contact information is in the slide deck. So if you have any follow-up questions, I know Shale always sends a follow-up email to all the participants. So we're excited to talk with you. I think they're working on getting the slide deck up. And just as a preview, we're going to chat with you today about energy code grants, automated permitting processing for our solar apps program. It's a grant program. I believe that's $1 million of grants, and the IRA home energy efficiency and electrification rebates, which I think will be coming out in the fall. That's a really incredible opportunity for folks to electrify with heat pumps. And of course, Julia is going to chat with us about microgrids. So there I am. Go to the next slide, please. So the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Program, we finally got our money from the Department of Energy, and we're hoping to launch probably in 3 to 4 weeks. It is $2 million specifically for local governments, and some of you may have received the formula funds. So we are required to give at least 60% of these funds to communities or jurisdictions or Indian tribe units that did not receive that formula funding. And what we've decided is we're going to use a portion of this for staff capacity and regional collaboration. So taking note that local governments are maxed out, and having some human support on these will be really helpful. We're going to have a consultant that can provide resources, particularly for underserved communities, to even identify what they might be interested in applying those staff dollars for, what kind of projects or programs communities might be interested in implementing. And of course, the regional collaboration, that's an exciting component as well. So yeah, we'll definitely make a huge announcement once that funding program and details are available. Next slide, please. Through the Energy Office, we've got the Public Building Electrification Grant, and that is funding for planning phase energy audits, disproportionately impacted low income and just transition applicants. And then there's an implementation phase. I wanted to make specific note that the current round is open and closes April 5th. So if you're interested in doing that, you'll want to reach out if you've got any questions. So yeah, it's an exciting program that pays for again, 75% of total project costs to install high efficiency electric equipment or make electrical or other upgrades necessary to support the installation of higher energy efficiency equipment. So that's a great program. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to mention a few of our transportation grants. Charge Ahead Colorado, this is grants for level 2 and DCFC stations. It covers pretty much all the things: equipment, permits, construction and labor, signage, etc. And then we have our Fleet Zero program, and that does have a match requirement. And they have some different entities. One's qualifying entity, and that's $50,000 max per applicant. And they do have rolling applications open for qualifying entities. And then there's a standard application that will open in April and go through May. And then we have our DCFC Plazas program. We're in between rounds right now, but that's a nice chunk of money to install high level 3 charging stations. So kind of a nice program to plug into. That's a really bad pun. Next slide, please. So one other funding opportunity through transportation is the CAMP funding, Community Accelerated Mobility Project. I wanted to mention this as well. They have their phase 1 funding open now for technical readiness grants. And then, and that will support community needs for an electric car share program, electric van pool, community e-bike share, and then they will be announcing the implementation funds at a later date. So that would be a good program to check out. Next slide. I wanted to mention federal direct, or what they now are calling elective pay. This is a huge deal for local governments. It's the first time that you can get tax credits for building qualifying clean energy projects. So any tax exempt organization, obviously local governments, tribal governments, colleges, universities, electric co-ops, etc. And with this, an eligible entity that qualifies for clean energy investment tax credit, you check in with the IRS on your intent to claim the credit. And then once you file the annual tax return, you get the full value of the credit. What's interesting, there's a lot of additional details with this program, but you can get between 30% or more, up to 50% on energy storage facilities, wind, geothermal, rooftop, offsite solar, EV infrastructure and vehicles. So really exciting opportunity if you have some renewable energy projects in the pipeline to make sure that you sort of sign up in advance through the IRS. They have a link and then you get assigned a number, and that's how you file for that tax credit. Next slide, please. The IRS Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, I just mentioned this as well. Again, businesses and tax exempt organizations such as local governments that buy qualified commercial clean vehicles may qualify for this Clean Vehicle Tax Credit of up to $40,000 under the IRS code. And so there's just some details there. But if you are considering shifting your fleet to more EV vehicles, that's something that's worth checking out. Next slide. And I'm going to now hand it over to my colleagues, Adam and Shannon, who are going to talk to you about building codes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Berry. I'm a senior program manager with the Energy Office covering the building code program. I've done many presentations for local governments over the last year and a half or so. So many of you may have heard a lot of this information before, but hopefully some of this will be helpful for you. Next slide, please. So I think, one thing that I've realized in a lot of presentations that I've done in the past recently is that not everyone necessarily knows exactly what energy codes are and how they fit into the broader building code scheme. So I always like to just start off with kind of a bit of a primer on energy codes and talk about, how they fit. So energy codes are regulations that cover energy efficient design and construction of new buildings and major renovations of or additions to existing buildings, and cover a lot of different areas of building design, including, the building envelope. So that looks like insulation, windows, doors, siding, all kinds of other building envelope components, mechanical systems, so like HVAC, water heating, ventilation, that sort of thing, electric power and lighting. I think that one kind of speaks for itself. Maintenance and commissioning of equipment and systems, so making sure that equipment that is being installed is calibrated and operating properly at the point of first operation, and then making sure it's being maintained properly over time. So that those categories are really where energy codes have historically been, and we're also starting to see energy codes move into the realm of renewable energy, on-site or off-site renewable energy requirements, electrification, and both residential and commercial EV charging as well. Next slide, please. So many of you may already be familiar with what requirements exist for the state in terms of adoption of energy codes that meet or exceed the state minimum requirements. But I just outlined what both of those different timeframes are here for all of you, just to reiterate what that looks like. So from July 1st of last year until June 30th of 2026, any jurisdictions that are adopting or enforcing any new building code or an update to an existing building code that you already have must adopt and enforce the state's minimum energy code requirements that exist now, which are currently the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code and the Colorado Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code. And then going further beyond into 2026 and beyond, that will become a more stringent minimum energy code that is actually currently being developed by the state's Energy Code Board. So that will be in effect starting in July of 2026. Next slide, please. So getting more from the requirements and into what resources are available to help local governments with meeting these requirements and, doing a better, making sure we have really strong implementation and compliance of energy codes, because a lot of times what we see is that energy codes are adopted as policies that are, very strong and provide a lot of good requirements for energy efficiency, but in many cases in reality they're not always actually being enforced properly, and a lot of those efficiency gains are being lost through lack of enforcement on some certain measures. So this grant program is really intended to help local governments with all phases of energy code policy, from the initial adoption phase all the way through to implementation of the policies and enforcement and compliance of codes that have been adopted already. And funding from this program is available for a number of different things. Keep in mind that these are just examples of things that are able to be funded through this grant program. This is not an exclusive list by any means, but just to give folks an idea of the types of resources that are available that can be funded by these grants include consultants or other technical assistance that may be needed for energy code adoption and public engagement. Anyone who's been involved in energy code adoption, or frankly building code adoption at a broader level, is very aware that there are model codes that exist out there, but a lot of times there are needs for modifying those codes to make sure that they account for local conditions, and that can require a lot of technical assistance from code experts. So this grant can help provide resources for that. Staff time dedicated to energy code adoption and implementation. One thing we hear very frequently at the Energy Office is, my staff just doesn't have time, given all of the work that they have to do to enforce the codes that we currently have on the books. We don't have time to focus on adoption of new energy codes. And so we can help to increase the resources that you have, and temporarily increase the resources and capacity that jurisdictions have to try to make that more tenable for jurisdictions that have those capacity constraints. These can be used for training or other workforce development activities that support energy codes. So this can be used to help train up people who are currently working for a building department, plan reviewers, inspectors, building officials, permit counter technicians, or people in the industry who are involved in building code work. So building community, contractors, design professionals, things like that. We can also look at supporting improvements in the enforcement processes. So that can also include training, making sure that folks are aware of the requirements of the latest energy codes that have been adopted, or working to contract third parties. There are a lot of third parties out there that do a lot of the testing and inspection and verification of energy code requirements that can be really helpful to building departments that don't otherwise have capacity to be doing that properly. And then finally, looking at pilots or demonstrations of new enforcement strategies, tools, or softwares. There are a lot of different really innovative approaches to remote and virtual inspections that are available right now, and other potential opportunities through some of those third-party services that can help really expedite or improve enforcement. So we're also looking to support any kind of those innovative strategies to support that enforcement. Next slide, please. So just a couple of details about the code adoption and enforcement grants. Eligibility is really driven towards local governments. Local governments are the primary eligible entity here. However, we have gotten a lot of feedback from many local governments that actually like to work through their councils of governments or other nonprofits that might work in their region to try to access a lot of these funds on their behalf. And so we do also allow those types of entities to apply as long as it's on behalf of one or more local governments. Funding rounds. So this grant program is open on a quarterly basis. And so currently the next application deadline for that quarterly application closure is May 31st of this year. We will also be announcing future application closure dates going forward, but that is the next one that is available currently. Grant amounts. So local governments are eligible for up to $125,000 if they apply just by themselves. However, we are also highly encouraging local governments to apply together as what we are calling partnerships in the grant program. They're also often called collaboratives or cohorts. And these are groups of local governments that are looking to work together to support either the adoption, implementation, or better enforcement of energy codes in the region that they are working in. However, cohorts don't necessarily have to be all regionally located. So, for example, if the city of Denver wanted to work with somebody on the Western Slope, that is allowed so long as there is consistency in the approach that they are taking. But so far, what we have seen, as you'll see on the next slide, is more regional approach in partnerships. So the Energy Office has currently funded 5 of these grants. Sorry, you can go to the next slide. We've currently awarded 5 of these grants that are supporting 7 jurisdictions across the state at the moment. And as I noted, most of these grants are being funded through this regional partnership approach. So we funded Garfield Clean Energy, which is currently, they work with all of the major jurisdictions in Garfield County, but this particular grant is specifically supporting work happening in Glenwood Springs, in Carbondale, and in Newcastle. We funded the Gunnison Valley Building Code Collaborative, which is a new collaborative of jurisdictions in Gunnison County that are all wanting to work together on certain aspects of energy code implementation and training. So the Gunnison County, Crested Butte, and Mount Crested Butte are working together on some aspects of this. And then Crested Butte, Mount Crested Butte, and Gunnison County individually also requested funds for specific work happening within their jurisdiction. And there are a number of benefits to applying as a partnership rather than applying individually to, really make sure that there is consistency and relieving administrative burden on jurisdictions that are participating in these efforts. A lot of times, energy code adoption and enforcement can be extremely administratively burdensome. And so sharing those burdens can be really helpful. And it also helps to create consistency for both the building industry as well as jurisdictions, and the ability to share best practices between jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of training and technical assistance offerings that the Energy Office has. So we fund a number of different programs, essentially, that provide different types of training or different forums for training on energy codes. So there are bi-weekly webinars that currently happen that is a partnership between the Energy Office and Excel Energy. There are on-demand training and role-based training opportunities. So both of those are essentially having jurisdictions come to us and tell us what you want to be trained on. This can be on high-level topics, or it could be on very specific niche topics within the energy code. And then finally, blower door training. So those of you who are familiar with the latest energy codes, there are certain requirements for testing of existing new residential buildings to test essentially for leaks that exist in the building envelope and in the ductwork and all of that. So we have training that will help folks get up to speed on that process as well. And you can see our website there to go request any of these trainings or find out more information about them. Next slide. One thing that we offer that has actually been really helpful for a lot of folks and is used quite frequently by folks both in the building industry as well at the local government level is our Colorado Building Code Helpline. So essentially what this is if you have any question relating to any building code, this one is not just exclusive to energy codes, it's any building code that a jurisdiction may have adopted. If the jurisdiction has questions about it, if the design community or the building community or contractors have questions about a requirement of an energy code or a building code, they can submit questions to this helpline. And we have subject matter experts who the Energy Office contracts with to respond to these questions very quickly. So this is a good way to get technical expertise on specific questions where maybe a grant doesn't make sense, or maybe a whole training doesn't make sense. Maybe you just have a question. This is a really good opportunity to get answers on that. Next slide. So that's all I have. If we have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take those. And then I will pass it along to Annie on our team to talk about the IRA home energy rebates.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Beal, and I'm here to share about the IRA home energy efficiency and electrification rebates. These rebates are to support single-family and multifamily building energy efficiency and electrification. And these rebates won't be coming online until the later quarters of 2024. And so we're in the process of developing our programs, and we would like to work with local governments to best prepare your communities to be ready for rebate uptake. And if you go to the next slide, please. So our goals here at the state of Colorado are regarding these rebates are to kickstart and accelerate the adoption of home energy efficiency and electrification investments to reduce greenhouse gas consumption and emissions, and to create a sustainable framework that supports longer-term market transformation. We would like to document the value and benefit of home energy and electrification investments. We want to recognize replicable, innovative best practices and leadership. Our goal is to reduce energy, health, and economic burdens for disproportionately impacted and low to moderate income households. And historically, only 13% of home efficiency funds have gone to low to moderate income households. So we want to make a big push to ensure these households are really reaping the benefits of these rebates. And we want to grow a healthy and diverse and sustainable building decarbonization workforce. And if you go to the next slide, please. So we'll have 2 rebates coming online. And these 2 rebates programs in total over $100 million. And so they're both split with about $56 million available statewide. And our first program, IRA 50121, Home Efficiency Rebates, this will likely be for larger multifamily buildings that are over 50,000 square feet that must comply to building performance standards. So a lot of rural communities, you might only have 1 or 2 multifamily buildings that are of this square footage. And so we realize a large amount of housing stock in rural communities is also in mobile homes. So we are allocating a portion of these funds to mobile home parks as well. And these particular rebates rely on a modeled or measured efficiency outcome to achieve different tiers of rebates. And as we're developing these rebates, we'll of course get lots of guidance and marketing out there so you can further understand these details. The second program, IRA Section 50122, Home Electrification and Appliance Rebates, these are more familiar rebates. These are for income qualified renters and homeowners and building owners, and these will include specific appliances such as heat pumps for space heating and cooling, heat pump water heaters, heat pump clothes dryers, electric stoves, cooktops, ranges, or ovens. And these rebates can also include enabling upgrades of upgrading an electric panel, electric wiring, insulation, air sealing, and mechanical ventilation. And so a household could do just a few of these upgrades or really work to do a full home upgrade. These funding is expected to last until September 30th of 2031. And so we anticipate a 7-year funding period. If you go to the next slide, please. So this image is intended to illustrate how building efficiency and electrification can support your communities. We really believe that investing in existing buildings can increase climate resilience by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improve health, comfort, and safety, increase housing affordability, promote racial equity, and strengthen the local economy. And if you go into the next slide, I'll explain how we envision working with local governments. While local governments won't be directly applying for these rebates unless you or your housing authority owns an income qualified residential property, we do envision local government participation. And with this, we ask that you engage your local contractor communities. All of these projects receiving rebates must be conducted by a registered contractor, such as an electrician, plumber, insulator, home energy auditor, and we want to get them on board now. We'd like local governments to support your energy efficiency service providers, such as weatherization or through Energy Outreach Colorado CARE program, as these efforts will connect to low-income households and really facilitate this process. And we'd also like local governments to engage your local utility, see if they're offering existing rebates or consider offering rebates yourselves as municipalities to really stack the possibilities of these rebates. And then lastly, we would really like local governments to contribute to messaging regarding housing preservation, climate action, and health equity, and get these discussions going in your community as to how these rebates can best work for you. So if you'd go to the last slide, please. This is my contact information here and a link to our website, where we would really like to engage in any local or regional conversations that you might already be having around workforce, affordable housing, or energy transition, climate action planning, or health equity. And we'd be happy to talk with you all this summer to help really get your community on board with the resources ready so your constituents are ready to uptake these rebates. And that's all for rebates for now, much more coming in the future months, and I'll pass it over to Ari Moladina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annie. Hi, everyone. My name's Ari Moladina. I am the Renewable Energy Program Manager with the Colorado Energy Office, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the APPS grant program. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just to give a little bit of overview about this grant program, the goal is to really assist local governments in reducing permitting barriers for residential solar and storage projects. So this fund has a total of about 1 million in grant funding, and this is to assist jurisdictions with really any costs associated with the adoption of an automated solar permitting platform. And some of these that you might have heard of include SolarApp or Symbium. And these platforms enable solar installers to input permitting details directly into them and receive real-time feedback about code compliance. And so just to cover a few benefits of automated permitting, one really key benefit is that it saves staff time because these platforms can process about 80 to 90% of standard permits. It helps cut down on staff time that's normally spent manually reviewing permit details and allows them to focus on more complicated projects or other permitting tasks. It also helps to reduce errors, again, because that system is providing real-time feedback about code compliance. It helps to decrease the back and forth between a solar installer and a jurisdiction that's approving the permit, because ultimately the platform won't enable the person who's inputting the details to move forward unless you've addressed the issues and fixed the issues before you can get your permit. And then finally, with fewer delays and barriers, people and Coloradans are able to go solar more quickly and start reaping the benefits of their solar systems. Next slide, please. So just to cover some eligibility and project costs that are covered. Again, this is for local and tribal governments, counties, cities, and fire departments are all included in that. And eligible project costs is really anything that would go towards implementing this type of platform. So that includes any staff time spent doing research or hosting meetings or trainings, training of external installers, solar developers, any installation or integration fees. If you hire an external consultant, that time is covered, and then any maintenance or subscription costs for up to 3 years. And the funding available is going to range from a max of 40,000 to 100,000, and that's based on the population of your jurisdiction. And then this application will open in just under 2 weeks. So it's going to open on April 2nd. And then we'll be accepting applications on a first come, first serve basis, awarding grants on a first come, first serve basis. And the deadline for those is going to be June 4th. Next slide, please. And so just to go over a quick case study, the city of Denver adopted SolarApp in 2023. And before they had adopted this platform, their average permit processing time was about 30 days. And now in comparison, that permitting is essentially instant in the sense that for those using the platform, it takes about 30 minutes. And so just to go over kind of the statistics before SolarApp in 2022, Denver had about 3,700 solar permit applications. Of those applications, about 70% were eligible or would have been eligible for automated permitting. And they calculated that, had they had Solar App before, this would have saved them about 1,200 hours of staff time. So really just highlighting how much staff time this can save your jurisdiction. And next slide, thank you. So yeah, we are hosting a webinar the day after the application opens. So that's Wednesday, April 3rd at 11 a.m. And this will cover details about the program, the application process. So I'll plop the link to register for that webinar in the chat in just a few. And that's about it. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions, or visit the app's program site for more details. And I will pass it on to Julia.
Great. Thanks so much, Ari. Hi, everyone. Julia Masters. I'm the program manager at DOLA for the Microgrids for Community Resilience Grant Program. And I'll be talking a little bit about this opportunity that is open now. So next slide, please. For those who aren't familiar with what a microgrid is, we can see this image to the right of kind of renewables and battery and generator all kind of connecting into this microgrid interconnection point, and being able to feed energy to either commercial or residential or EVs. And this is essentially kind of a visual of what is in that blue box on the left, which says a microgrid is a group of interconnected electric loads and distributed energy resources that can be connected to or disconnected from the electric grid to enable it to operate in either grid connected or island mode. And so we have funding available to plan for and develop these microgrid systems in local communities. The program is intending on funding, multi-objective plans and projects that integrate mitigation, adaptation, and advancing IDEA, and really looking to promote projects that are having a forward-facing community benefit. So we'll get into a little bit of what that means. Next slide, please. So we have about $11 million of funding. This is open now. This application period opened in mid-March, and it will be open through mid-June. It closes June 13th. As you can see here, there's a couple different kind of eligibility and dynamics going on. So I'll do my best to give this an overview. Only co-ops and muni utilities are eligible for the funding for planning and construction of new generation. So new generation being solar, wind, or something like that. Since this call is mostly local government folks, I think I'll focus mostly on the storage piece. But if you guys are at all interested in any of the planning or construction for generation dollars, we can talk more. We're doing a lot of work in kind of connecting co-ops and munis to local governments and vice versa, and just doing more of a team approach to be able to be strategic about who's putting in the application. So kind of put a pin in those pieces if that is interesting to you, and you can reach out directly. For the storage and controller piece, we have about $10 million available, and this is available to local governments, utilities, public and nonprofit community-based anchor institutions, which I'll talk about a little bit more how we're defining that on the next slide. So in this, you can get funding for batteries and controller and electric equipment. The max award is a $2 million grant request. It's a little tricky with the match. If you are just a local government, you would have a 100% cost match. But if you have any sort of existing solar or storage anywhere owned by the government, it does not have to be on the site of the project you're looking to do. We can work with DOE to reduce that 100% cost match to 1/3, or the utility in your service territory may be eligible for that 1/3 cost match as well. So a little bit of a strategic game as to who is the prime and how we're kind of divvying up that match requirement, and I can talk about that more individually with folks. Next slide, please. In terms of eligible projects, again, I think I'm kind of going to skip over some of the planning and construction, planning and generation, because those are less relevant to folks, but you'll have these slides to refer back to if that is more of interest. For the storage and controller pieces, We're looking for projects that are mostly shovel ready. The priority will be given to projects that are leveraging pre-existing assets, so not a new building and then making a microgrid, more of a an existing building. Projects can be technology agnostic and can include funding for storage, so batteries, vehicle to grid, pumped hydro, geothermal, microgrid controllers, and then there is a bit of a loophole for the generation with this. This is federal funding. So if you have old generation components like solar panels that are old and have damage to them, if you were interested in replacing those components with the same components for resilience benefits, that would be eligible under this funding stream as well. If you're just looking for new solar, regardless, it has to be in that box to the right of new generation, which is just available to the co-ops and the munis. Next slide, please. So for community anchor institutions, we're thinking about these as schools, libraries, healthcare centers, emergency services, and other kind of forward-facing buildings that have multiple benefits. So people know to go there when there's an emergency, you can seek services, you can charge your phone, things like that. Next slide, please. As a little background, we've had one full round of planning grants, which you can see on the left, kind of the geographic diversity of where those are in the state. And we are finalizing the contracts of our second round of planning and construction. I don't think I'll go into each of these details, but I guess the point of this slide is just to show there are many different benefits and resilience, ways to think about the resilience of a microgrid, from communications and emergency management to economic benefits, and also just straight up grid infrastructure resilience. Next slide, please. And just as some background, we have some existing community microgrids in Colorado. Pitkin County is developing one around their business center, the airport, the transportation authority, and the utility. Red Feather Lakes up near Fort Collins has a working microgrid to support emergency response and resiliency. And San Miguel Power has developed one that's around their mission critical loads at some of their utility buildings. Next slide, please. So if you're hearing all this and saying this sounds great, but we are nowhere near ready to start on a project like this, we do have some technical assistance available to help. This first slide at the top is the DOE's free technical assistance. They can help kind of do initial modeling and scaling. It's almost like what you would get from a planning grant. So I would encourage you to reach out to them directly if that's of interest. Clean Energy to Communities is an NREL program that supports communities with their clean energy goals. We have a number of communities in Colorado that are already involved in this program. It's really great. Our MCR webinars in the future will go into a bit of a deeper dive on some of this, these TA opportunities. So if this is interesting, stick around for that. And then the last one, if folks are, oh, sorry, can you go back? Thanks. The Collective Energy, this is for specifically healthcare clinics who are looking to develop microgrids. So if that is something in your area, I would highly recommend reaching out to them. They do kind of the whole package of support and financing. So great resource as well. All right, next slide. Cool. Thank you so much. That's all I got. And I will throw my email and the website in the chat if you have further questions.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for those wonderful presentations. Before we go ahead and jump into questions, and again, I welcome folks, if you have any questions, to please put them either in the chat or use the Q&A feature. We did want to take a few minutes to just drop a link in the chat that has a quick questionnaire for all of you. It's relevant to today because we do have a few questions related to the direct pay that Christine mentioned at the beginning of her presentation. But also we just wanted to get some feedback from you all on these calls specifically and the Pathways webinars. As you all are aware, we have topics planned out through July, but want to know how we can continue to improve these and get any input following July. So I will drop that link in the chat really quick. And then we do have one question that I'm seeing in the Q&A feature here. So there is the link for the survey. So Ari did answer this question, but I'll go ahead and read it aloud for folks who might be on the phone or not able to kind of see the question itself. So the question was asked that says, we've been interested in the apps program, but have concerns about directing residents to different platforms for permitting, as permitting compliance is challenging as is, and we introduced a new system for the rest of our building permits within the last year. Any advice or best practices that could alleviate this concern? So Ari mentioned that both of these permitting platforms are able to integrate into broader building permit systems, while the user will be directed to use a different platform to enter the solar permit details and confirm compliance. They'll then return back to your permitting system to obtain the actual permit, so that information will still be centralized. In terms of sharing that with the public, I recommend outlining the process clearly on your website. She also provided an example from the town of Bennett. And Ari, if you don't mind putting that in the chat as well. But Ari, is there anything else that you would like to mention in reference to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's essentially for both of these platforms 2 ways that you can kind of integrate. I think if you have an existing permit system that your building department uses, there are integrations that are aimed at keeping the process fairly centralized, and so all that information should still be available in your overall building permit system. And so it is true that you'll kind of go to a different platform to complete the compliance, but that should feed into your centralized system and integrate with it fairly seamlessly. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of providing that information on the website and sharing what that process looks like. But I know, like, specifically for Solar App, for example, you would go through the process, and once you receive approval, you then kind of get this 9-digit ID number, and you would then go input that ID number into your kind of centralized system. So, the jurisdiction is still the entity issuing the permit, and that's going to still be coming from kind of your overall permitting system. So hopefully that provides a little bit more clarity. And I guess the other thing I'll say is, I think talking to, the 2 platforms is a super helpful way of getting more information on some of the technical aspects of like what that integration might look like with your specific existing platform.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ari. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. But just to kind of wrap up here, all the slides and recordings will be sent out following this call. If you were not registered for this call, you might not receive that follow-up email. So if you had this registration perhaps forwarded to you, I strongly recommend going onto our website. I will put the link in the chat to make sure that you are registered for these calls moving forward. And then also, we really appreciate anyone taking the time to do that quick survey that we put into the chat. I will also send that out in a follow-up email just so that we can continue to make sure that these are useful for you all and make sure that everything is covered that you would like to hear about. But otherwise, not seeing any questions, I will go ahead just really quickly here. I'm grabbing that link for you all. I will wish you all a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much, and we are adjourned.